Right. So I'm sorry the Zoom wasn't working. It's a bit unfortunate, these things happen, but the audio wasn't working that day for some reason, and I'm really, really sorry that you couldn't hear me. I really want to apologize for that. But hey, don't worry, I got everything fixed out, and I have this recording just for you guys, okay? Right. So that day we're basically looking at the asset market condition, right? And asset market equilibrium condition basically states that, and this is something you need to know. This is a rule you need to understand, that nominal money supply, which is given by M. So M is nominal money supply. Okay. In relation to the price level. Okay, so this whole equation is basically the real money supply. M over P is the real money supply. Okay, so real money supply. So M itself is just nominal money supply. M over P is real money supply. Okay, should equal real money demand. So essentially, whatever happens at the supply side of the economy in terms of asset markets, okay, right, should also happen at the demand side. So it should equal real money demand. Okay. Now, essentially, that is what our asset market equilibrium basically screams for. Basically, that's what it shouts for. Okay. Now, M is the nominal money supply determined by the central bank. Okay, so the central bank is the only authority that basically controls the nominal money supply, which in this case is M. Okay, we have our expected inflation rate. Okay, and since we're looking at the short run, we see the expected inflation rate is basically fixed. Okay, so right now, our expected inflation rate is fixed. Y is the given output for any country. We have R being the given real interest rate. Okay, and remember that a combination of Y, R, and the expected inflation rate basically gives us money demand. Okay, now if we look at this equation, which is basically equation 7.9, so I want you to write it down somewhere because it's very important, right? Since majority of these variables are already determined, we can rewrite equation 7.9, okay, also as equation 7.10. So essentially what we're trying to say is that, well, if we have that sort of asset market condition, it means that the price level, and all we did from 7.9 was basically solve for P. It means that the price level can be written in relation to money supply, which is nominal money supply M, and also real money demand. Okay, so we can say that the price level is the ratio of nominal money supply to real money demand. In other words, a price level for any country basically depends on essentially, right, the money supply in the country and also the real money demand in the country. Now, if the real money supply is growing at a faster rate, so if M is getting bigger faster than, the denominator, which in this case is the function of output, real interest rate, and expected inflation. If the nominal money supply is growing at a faster rate than real money demand, then in that sense, the country will actually experience inflation, meaning that P will actually increase. Okay, right? Now, suppose we decide to hold real money demand constant. So for some reason, real money demand does not change, but the country decides to print more money. In that case, then doubling the money supply, okay, or a proportional increase in the money supply will bring about the same proportional increase in the price level. So if I hold the denominator constant and I increase money supply by 2%, the price level is also going to increase by 2%. Okay, so this equation, while it's really little, tells us a lot about price level. Generally, it tells us that, well, price level in any general economy is caused by money, right? Milton Friedman, a famous University of Chicago economist, actually the father of monetarism, which is a branch of economics, okay, or a philosophy in economics, says that price level, inflation anywhere and everywhere is always caused by money. Okay, and basically 7.10 sort of lends credence to that statement. Okay, now we can use 7.10 and basically look at the relationship between money growth and inflation as well. Okay, now if you rewrite equation 7.10 in growth rate terms, we basically get the growth rate of money, the growth rate of price, which is also inflation. So remember, this is also inflation, which is pi. Okay, the percentage change in the price level is essentially inflation. Okay, so the change in the price level is inflation, which is also pi. So every time you see pi, we're basically talking about inflation. Also equals the change in the nominal money supply minus the change in the money demand, the real money demand. Okay, so this happens only when the asset market is essentially in equilibrium. Changing inflation is brought about by changing money supply and also change in real money demand. In other words, money growth or the growth of money will basically lead to inflation or basically can stifle inflation. So for example, if money supply decreases, well, then you basically have less of a problem with inflation. Okay, so in other words, if the asset market is in equilibrium, the inflation rate, which is basically the change in the price level, equals the growth rate of the money supply minus the growth rate of the money demand. Now, it means that if money demand is growing faster than money supply, you really don't have a problem with inflation. The only time a country tends to have problem with inflation is if nominal money supply, which the country maybe is printing, okay, is actually growing faster than real money demand. Then you do have a problem with inflation. So long as this side of the equation is bigger than this side, you tend to have a problem with inflation. Okay, so in that sense, basically to predict inflation, right, we must be able to sort of forecast growth in money supply and growth in real money demand. Okay, and in that sense, we can also derive another equation, which is equation 7.11 or equation 7.11, right? Assuming that the interest rate is constant, okay, and we just look at changes in GDP or Y, okay, and assuming that eta Y is the elasticity of money demand with respect to income, okay, so remember elasticity of money demand with respect to income. Essentially, if income changes, how does money demand respond? We can rewrite equation 7.10 as inflation depends on the change in nominal money supply minus the elasticity of money demand with respect to income times the change in income. This is assuming that R is held constant, or the interest rate essentially is held constant. Okay, now in that sense, if you actually have that equation, okay, you can basically say that the change in the price level, should depend on the change in the money supply and also the change in output. Now, if output is growing faster than money supply, if you print money or you increase money supply by 10% and output increases by, let's say, 12%, then you don't have a problem with inflation. So long as GDP growth is outweighing growth in terms of money supply, then there's no problem with inflation. Okay, right, so now let's look at an example. If change in output is 3%, if the income elasticity is basically 0.6, if the change in money supply is 10%, then we have 10% minus 0.6 times 3%, and we should get inflation to be 8%. Okay, again, you can clearly see that money supply is outgrowing growth in GDP, so then we have inflation being pretty high at 8%. Now, you're probably wondering to yourself, well, Dr. Kweku, you know what, this is all theory. Well, if you look at the data, especially if you're looking at Eastern Europe, clearly you can see that there's a positive correlation, and let me just change the color, between money growth and the inflation rate. As money is basically growing, inflation is also growing. Okay, so there's a positive correlation between money growth and inflation. Okay, so this is what basically we sort of talked about in class that day. It was a bit more drawn out because we had a couple of discussions and whatnot. Okay, but if you guys don't understand anything, please just let me know. And yeah, I'll do my best to answer your questions. Okay, well, thank you very much.